The media painted Sadio Mané as a controversial figure, claiming he married an 18-year-old. But here's what they didn't focus on: his legacy of giving back to Senegal through a hospital and school. Why does the truth about him change depending on where you look? Stick around because the answer will surprise you. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now back to the video. In June 2023, a story swept through headlines about Sadio Mané allegedly marrying an 18-year-old woman named Aisha Tamba. Western media outlets like the Daily Mail and The Sun ran with the claims, framing the story in ways that sparked public outrage and criticism. Their central claim? Aisha was only 18 years old, and the relationship raised eyebrows for what some commentators described as a problematic age difference, considering Mané's age and his international status. The story spread quickly, propelled by headlines emphasizing the alleged disparity while pairing it with cultural stereotypes often attached to African athletes. But in Senegal, where Sadio Mané's life and career are followed closely, the reaction was vastly different. Local media not only questioned the narrative, but actively scrutinized the claims coming from Western media. According to Senegalese outlets, documentation showed that Aisha had actually been born in 1997, making her 25 or 26 at the time of the alleged marriage. The discrepancy cast doubt on the original reports, making many wonder why such important details were ignored in the first place. Aisha's older age was noted in discussions across Senegalese social platforms, with many pointing to the hasty assumptions made outside their cultural and journalistic context. This conflicting information wasn't just about an error in reporting. It reflected a deeper contrast in how narratives are shaped depending on where they originate. Adding to the skepticism, many locals criticized the lack of verification done by Western media outlets. Senegalese journalists publicly questioned why none of these major outlets consulted primary sources or local records, which were accessible and could have clarified simple details like Aisha's age. An investigative journalist in Dakar told a local broadcast station, "It's not only lazy reporting, it's a disregard for understanding the nuances of the culture you're reporting on." This sparked conversations beyond just the details of the marriage story, highlighting the broader issues of how African stories are told, and often oversimplified, by international media. Looking closely at the Daily Mail's coverage, for instance, much of it leaned on social media rumors and user posts rather than authoritative sources or direct interviews. In contrast, Senegalese outlets didn't stop at verifying Aisha's age. They also questioned whether the marriage itself even took place. A lack of credible evidence made this even murkier. Photographs of what was claimed to be a private ceremony were soon discovered to be recycled or unrelated images, further raising eyebrows. As investigative pieces emerged, the story began to shift, not because those who initially reported it corrected their mistakes, but because audiences started raising questions that the media couldn't answer. Why did this happen in the first place? To understand, it helps to examine how media bias and ethics intersect with cultural differences. Experts point out that Western media often shifts its coverage of African public figures toward dramatic or controversial narratives. Deborah Wilson, a media critic and professor, once explained, "Stories from Africa are viewed through a lens of sensationalism. Whether intentional or not, it builds a perception of otherness." With Mané, this tendency can be seen in how quickly the controversy was amplified. Very little effort was given to presenting a nuanced view. Instead, the initial framing was fed by assumptions about age and marriage customs in Senegal, reinforcing outdated stereotypes to readers. This bias not only misinforms, but also reshapes how figures like Sadio Mané are perceived globally. In fact, many critics argue that such storytelling strips away agency from both the individuals involved and the cultures they represent. The choice to focus on an unproven relationship rather than consult Senegalese sources, or even consider their rebuttals, created a ripple effect. Social media debates turned into heated arguments about how little attention in Western media gives to accuracy when reporting outside of regions they regularly cover. On the other hand, Senegalese platforms treated the controversy itself as secondary to questions about journalistic responsibility, shedding light on fundamental issues of fairness and coverage. And it's not just a mistake of translation or unfamiliarity. The tools to verify information existed. Documentation of Aisha's birth records put her at approximately 25 years old, but they weren't referenced in Western reports at all. Critics argue that this omission speaks to a larger trend of prioritizing drama over depth in celebrity coverage. The resulting inaccuracies undermine not only the individuals being written about, but also the audiences consuming these stories. So why was this narrative allowed to dominate the headlines in the first place? Analysis of media trends shows that controversies about public figures drive clicks at a rate far higher than feel-good stories or celebrations of achievements. The outrage machine of digital platforms means that the louder the scandal, the more shares and comments it's likely to provoke. Mané's quiet reputation, built on his humility and philanthropy, doesn't fit easily into these kinds of attention-grabbing narratives. What fits, unfortunately, is controversy, even when the facts don't align. But what does this say about how we view public figures, or how we trust the news we read? The documents challenging the Western media's claims exist. They're documented in local press and public records. Yet outside Senegal, they were barely discussed. It makes you wonder, amid all the frenzy over personal drama, how much of Mané's true story got lost? And perhaps more importantly, what does it reveal about how media decides what matters? When you think of Sadio Mané, football might be the first thing that comes to mind. But long before he became a global superstar, he was just another young boy growing up in Bambali, a small village in Senegal's Sadio region. Life there wasn't easy. Like many rural communities in the country, Bambali lacked basic infrastructure. For years, its residents lived without access to reliable healthcare, proper schools, or even decent roads. These challenges weren't just inconveniences. They shaped the way people lived, worked, and struggled to survive. For kids like Mané, dreams of pursuing careers or leaving the village felt like far-off fantasies. The challenges began early. Until recently, Bambali had no hospital or clinic to serve its population. A medical emergency meant traveling miles to another town, often on unreliable transport, costing time many people simply didn't have. Stories of expectant mothers losing their lives due to delayed maternity care were all too common. The lack of schools presented another hurdle. Many children couldn't pursue formal education because their journey to the nearest school was physically demanding and unsustainable. Without adequate educational facilities, young people in the village had few options. These weren't isolated struggles. They were systemic barriers that stifled growth and opportunity for nearly everyone in the community. This is the Bambali Sadio Mané knew as a child, where dreams required something bigger than talent, a leap of faith. He took that leap, of course, and built one of the most successful football careers in the world. But for Mané, success wasn't about leaving his village behind. It was about finding a way to change it. Through his philanthropy, he has invested millions of his own money into Bambali, tackling the very issues that defined his childhood. One of his most significant contributions came in the form of a hospital. In 2021, Mané donated £500,000 to fund a modern medical facility for Bambali. The hospital wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was a vital addition to the village that filled decades-long gaps in healthcare services. Today, the Sadio Mané Hospital offers maternity care, an absolute necessity for a community that previously faced high maternal mortality rates due to inadequate facilities. It also includes dental services and general consulting rooms, providing routine and emergency care to residents who had never seen such services in their village before. Its opening has provided life-saving care to thousands, and the infrastructure itself has become a point of pride for locals who no longer need to leave their home for basic health needs. But Mané didn't stop with the building itself. Understanding that the success of the hospital depended on more than just the structure, he actively partnered with Senegal's government to ensure it had the resources to run effectively. He personally met with President Macky Sall, advocating for state support to hire qualified medical personnel to staff the facility. His proactive approach meant Bambali's hospital wouldn't just survive but thrive, supported by both his initial funding and government investment. It's a rare kind of philanthropy, one that isn't simply about writing checks, but about ensuring tangible, lasting improvements. Education, another area close to Mané's heart, was his next focus. He donated £250,000 to fund a modern school, prioritizing the future of Bambali's children. The school wasn't just any building, it was constructed to provide an environment where students could learn, grow, and dream bigger. It has classrooms equipped with proper materials, giving children access to resources the previous generation could only imagine. For kids who once walked for miles to access education or dropped out altogether due to the strain, this school represents a new opportunity to shape their futures. Families in Bambali speak openly about how the school has changed their lives. Children who once saw football as their only way out now have a real shot at medicine, engineering, teaching, or any path they choose. These contributions aren't just a few small acts of giving back. They've fundamentally redefined what daily life looks like in Bambali. The ripple effects of this transformation are undeniable. Today, the village has a new vibrancy. Healthcare is no longer a privilege but an accessible right. Education isn't a distant dream, but a concrete reality. For the first time, the next generation can grow up in Bambali without facing the same struggles Mané lived through. His actions are changing lives, not one or two at a time, but at a scale that's reshaping an entire community. Yet outside of Senegal, this story barely makes the news. In fact, many people who know Mané for his football achievements have no idea about his contributions off the pitch. His ability to funnel fame into action and turn his wealth into hope for thousands rarely fits into the media narrative surrounding him. Instead, discussions often center around his apparent humility or his decision to shun a flashy lifestyle. Why? Because those headlines drive clicks. The reality of building hospitals and schools doesn't generate the viral appeal of controversies or scandal. Mané's impact in Bambali is monumental, not just because of the money he spent, but because of the intention behind it. Where others might have made one-off gestures, he chose to create systems that lift people up and give them opportunities they never had before. And yet these life-changing efforts often go unnoticed on a global scale, overshadowed by fleeting rumors and fabricated controversies. This raises an obvious question. Why do stories like these struggle to break through the noise? Why would the media choose a fleeting controversy over a story that represents real progress and impact? To answer that, it's important to understand how mainstream media operates, especially when it comes to celebrities. At its core, media thrives on attention, and certain types of stories attract significantly more of it. This isn't new. Scandals and rumors have fueled tabloid culture for decades. But with the rise of online platforms, the stakes have shifted. Headlines are no longer just about informing. They're crafted to spark emotion, trigger clicks, and generate shares. In this digital landscape, digging deeper into a hopeful story of transformation has far less immediate appeal than leaning into scandal, regardless of how shallow or unverified the claims might be. Take the reports about Sadio Mané's alleged marriage, for example. A brief claim surfaced online, unverified and vague, that he had wed Aisha Tamba, an 18-year-old woman. Within hours, the story was plastered across headlines in major Western outlets, and the wider internet took the bait. It didn't matter that no solid evidence or thorough investigation accompanied these reports. What mattered was that it ticked all the boxes for a clickable story. A celebrity figure, cultural angles ripe for commentary, and an alleged controversy over morality. But here's the thing. Those clicks didn't represent accurate understanding or real insight. They reflected the impulse-driven nature of digital engagement, where outrage travels faster than truth. For many observers in Senegal, this raised questions about how African celebrities like Mané are represented in global media. His charitable work in Bambali, where he's built a hospital and school to serve thousands, is undeniable. And yet, stories about those contributions struggle to dominate headlines the way rumors about his personal life do. Some argue that this imbalance stems from a long-standing tendency of Western media to frame African figures through narratives centered on dysfunction or drama. Whether it's about reinforcing stereotypes or simply prioritizing spectacle over nuance, these patterns make it harder for stories of progress, like Mané's work in Senegal, to get the recognition they deserve. This focus on negativity isn't always intentional, though it often reflects blind spots within the media ecosystem. Deborah Wilson, a professor specializing in media ethics, explains that stories about Africa are frequently filtered through what she calls a lens of otherness. Instead of capturing the full complexity of individuals or communities, these stories reduce them to moments of conflict or cultural comparison. In Mané's case, his alleged marriage was simplified into a scandal readily consumed by audiences who viewed it through their own cultural framework. The fact that Senegalese media quickly disproved many elements of the story, using local records and credible sources, made little difference. By the time those corrections surfaced, the damage had already been done. The global narrative had settled into place. This is where cultural bias and a lack of research intersect. The controversy wasn't just about whether or not the initial reports were true, it was about the carelessness with which they were handled. In cases like Mané's, journalists in Western outlets rarely reach out to local sources or engage with the cultural context of their stories. Why consult Senegalese records or newspapers when a social media rumor is easier to package into a headline? This oversight isn't just laziness. It reflects a broader lack of effort in treating African stories with the same standards of accuracy applied elsewhere. It perpetuates a cycle where surface-level narratives overshadow the deeper, more meaningful truths. What's lost in this shuffle is the ability to see figures like Mané in a holistic way. To focus solely on alleged controversies surrounding his personal life is to ignore the far-reaching effects of his philanthropy. His investments in Bambali have forever altered the lives of people in his village. The hospital he funded now provides life-saving care to residents who once had to travel hours for even the most basic treatment. The school gives children a chance to pursue education in ways that were unimaginable when Mané himself was growing up. These aren't vague claims or abstract ideas. They're measurable, visible changes that have lifted an entire community. But outside of Senegal, those details vanish in favor of fleeting drama. The consequences of this kind of reporting extend beyond Mané himself. They shape public perceptions, not just of him, but of Africa more broadly. For a global audience unfamiliar with Senegal or its culture, the story of a supposed scandal might be the only thing they hear. It reinforces tropes of controversy while allowing stories of resilience, generosity, and progress to remain invisible. Over time, these narratives create skewed impressions of regions, erasing the complexity of their realities from the global discourse. In Mané's case, that means his lasting contributions to health and education in Bambali are overshadowed by a temporary rumor. A rumor that likely would have fizzled out faster if the truth had been prioritized in the first place. But the blame for this imbalance doesn't fall only on journalists. The media operates on an economy of attention, and audiences play a significant role in shaping what gets amplified. Controversies, by their very nature, are emotionally charged and easy to share. Stories about long-term change and quiet acts of charity, while powerful, require more engagement to fully appreciate. It's no surprise, then, that websites cater to what will drive traffic. Still, there's a clear cost to this. When Mané is presented to the world only through the controversy surrounding him, not through the impact he's making, the media risks losing its credibility. For those who know the full story, the omission is glaring. Meanwhile, many others may never hear about the hospital that saves lives in Bambali or the school where young futures are being rewritten. And that kind of silence diminishes the significance of his work entirely. So the bigger question becomes, how do we move beyond these cycles? How can audiences demand a fuller picture rather than settling for sensationalized headlines? If we look beyond the noise, what other stories, like Mané's, might we be missing? Sadio Mané's story is proof that headlines rarely tell the full truth. While media fixated on rumors and controversy, the reality is much more profound. His contributions to Bambali, a hospital saving lives, a school creating opportunities, stand as lasting symbols of his commitment to his home. These are tangible actions that transform communities, far beyond the fleeting allure of scandal-driven narratives. It's a reminder to question the stories we're sold and seek perspectives that reveal depth and context. Mané's legacy isn't shaped by rumors. It's defined by the futures he's building. That's the story worth focusing on.